It happened 47 minutes into what was supposed to be Nancy Pelosi's coronation as America's elder stateswoman. Her moment to rise above the chaos, to position herself as the wise grandmother of democracy, the adult in the room, the reasonable voice who had spent decades fighting the good fight against corruption and authoritarianism, and all those bad things that bad people do. She had prepared for weeks, rehearsed her talking points with staff, practiced her expressions in the mirror. That condescending smile she was famous for, the one that said, "I know so much more than you, you poor ignorant soul." The sarcastic clap from the 2019 State of the Union that had become a liberal rallying cry. The perfect mix of dismissiveness and superiority that had made her a hero to millions who thought politics was about making the other side feel stupid. She thought she was walking into a friendly 90-minute conversation, a town hall format designed to showcase bipartisanship and healing, and all those words that sound good in press releases. Her and Trump sitting across from each other in comfortable chairs, a neutral moderator asking softball questions, a carefully divided audience giving her chances to look reasonable while he looked unreasonable. Easy. She had been doing this for 40 years. She knew how to work a room, how to deliver a zinger while keeping that grandmother smile, how to make cutting remarks sound like wisdom. What she did not know was that Donald Trump had spent the last 6 months quietly getting documents declassified, stock trades, congressional testimony, meeting schedules, communications between her office and companies her husband invested in, property records, donor lists matched to legislative votes, every financial disclosure form she had filed for 4 decades. All of it declassified, compiled, organized, ready to go. She thought she was the prosecutor, like she had been during both impeachments, the one asking the hard questions, the one making the accusations, the one putting him on trial in front of America. She had no idea she was about to be exposed as exactly what she had spent 40 years accusing others of being: corrupt, self-serving, a career politician who had gotten obscenely rich while pretending to fight for the little guy, someone who lived in a mansion while her constituents lived in tents, someone who made millions on stock trades while lecturing billionaires about greed. And Trump had the receipts, not vague accusations, not political attacks, actual documented evidence. Dates, dollar amounts, stock purchase records, profit margins, property values, timeline after timeline showing suspicious coincidences that stopped being coincidental when you saw them all together. In his phone, on flash drives and folders, ready to display on the big screen behind them where 85 million Americans could see them. Because this was not a regular debate. This was a town hall, live, no commercial breaks, 90 minutes straight, cameras on both of them the entire time, every facial expression visible, every dodge obvious, every stammered non-answer captured in high definition. Nowhere to hide. And at this moment, 47 minutes in, Trump was pulling out his phone to show a chart of Paul Pelosi's Nvidia stock purchase, $5.2 million, bought 3 weeks before major artificial intelligence legislation that Nancy had championed, legislation that sent Nvidia's stock soaring. $5.2 million in profit on a single trade. The chart was on the big screen, timeline crystal clear, purchase date, legislative announcement date, stock price jump, profit calculated. Behind them, the production team had put up a split screen. On one side, the Nvidia chart. On the other side, that famous image from 2019. Nancy Pelosi at the State of the Union giving Trump her sarcastic clap. That smug, superior expression that had made her a meme. The juxtaposition was devastating. Her signature moment of smugness next to evidence that she and her husband had made millions on what looked an awful lot like insider trading. And Nancy Pelosi's face in real time was doing something faces do not usually do on television. Going from confident to confused to pale to something approaching panic in about 3 seconds flat. Because she realized in that frozen moment, with 85 million people watching, that she had walked into a trap. That Trump had not been distracted when he kept checking his phone during the first part of the town hall. He had been waiting, letting her get comfortable, letting her do her superior elder stateswoman routine, letting her make subtle digs about his wealth and his businesses and his corruption, waiting for the perfect moment to flip the script. And that moment had arrived with all the force of a wrecking ball swung through the polished marble facade of a career built on carefully curated moral authority. She had just finished a little speech about how some people used their positions for personal gain, how some people enriched themselves while pretending to serve the public, how America needed leaders who actually cared about working families, not just their bank accounts. It was a good speech, well delivered, the kind of thing that would have gotten applause and approving nods and turned into clips on MSNBC. Except Trump had responded by pulling out his phone and showing everyone exactly how Nancy Pelosi and her husband had made $5.2 million in a single stock trade on legislation she had influenced. And asking, very simply, Nancy, want to talk about personal gain, but to understand how we got to this moment, to this frozen second where Nancy Pelosi's carefully crafted image started crumbling on live television, we need to rewind. Not far. Just to the beginning, 90 minutes earlier, when she still thought this was going to be her victory lap. The State of Unity Town Hall had been scheduled for months. It was conceived in a conference room at NBC Universal's headquarters in Midtown Manhattan on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, when the network presidents from all four major broadcasters sat around a glass table drinking mineral water from thin bottles and discussing what they could do, what they should do, to prove that American democracy was not a rotting carcass twitching with the last electrical impulses of a dying nervous system. The idea came from Catherine Marsh, the newly appointed president of CBS News, a woman who had spent 22 years climbing from a local affiliate in Duluth, Minnesota, to the most powerful position in broadcast journalism. She had a theory, one she had been refining since the chaos of the previous election cycle, that the American public was not actually as divided as the media made them seem. That most people, when you talk to them individually, in their kitchens, in their cars, at their kids' soccer games, wanted the same basic things: safety, opportunity, fairness, a sense that the people running the country at least vaguely cared about the people living in it. And she believed that if you could get two of the most polarizing figures in American politics to sit across from each other and just talk, not debate, not attack, not perform for their respective bases, just talk like human beings, it would be the most watched television event of the year. She was right about the ratings. She was catastrophically wrong about everything else. The pitch was simple: a joint production by all four networks, simulcast across every platform, a 90-minute unmoderated conversation, no podiums, no buzzers, no strict time limits, just two chairs, a moderator who would guide but not control, and a live audience split exactly 50-50 between registered Democrats and registered Republicans, verified by an independent polling firm that had no political affiliations, or at least claimed not to. The hard part was getting both sides to agree. Trump's team responded within 48 hours with a counteroffer. They wanted the event held in a neutral location, not New York, not Washington, not Los Angeles. They suggested Nashville, Tennessee. Not deep red, not deep blue, a city with enough of both to feel balanced. They wanted the right to bring any materials they wished, documents, charts, visual aids, whatever they deemed necessary. They wanted no pre-screened questions. They wanted audience members to be able to ask whatever they wanted, unvetted, unfiltered. And they wanted the entire event broadcast without commercial interruptions, 90 minutes straight. No breaks for either side to regroup or get coaching from their handlers. Pelosi's team took 2 weeks to respond, which in Washington terms was an eternity. There were meetings, strategy sessions, conference calls with media consultants and polling experts and focus group specialists. The consensus among her advisors was that this was a trap, that Trump's team would never agree to a format that did not benefit them, that the conditions he had insisted on, particularly the no breaks and bring your own materials clauses, were designed to give him some kind of advantage. They were right. They just could not figure out what the advantage was. And Pelosi overruled them. She was 83 years old. She had been in Congress for 37 years. She had served as Speaker of the House twice. She had stared down presidents and survived scandals and navigated crises that would have ended careers 10 times over. She had impeached Donald Trump not once but twice. She had torn up his State of the Union speech on live television. She had given him that sarcastic clap that became a gif shared 1 billion times. She was not afraid of him. She had never been afraid of him. And she believed, with the bone-deep certainty that comes from 4 decades of political dominance, that she could outperform him in any format, any setting, any situation. She told her team to accept all conditions. Nashville, no breaks, bring whatever you want, open audience questions, the whole thing. Her chief of staff, Marcus Delgado, a man who had worked for her for 11 years and had learned long ago that arguing with Nancy Pelosi was like arguing with weather, tried one more time. He sat in her office in the Rayburn building, the one with the window overlooking the Capitol dome, and said, "Madam Leader, I have a bad feeling about this." She looked up from the briefing book she was annotating. "Marcus, I have been doing this since before that man was putting his name on buildings. I have debated senators and presidents and prime ministers. I have negotiated with people who wanted to destroy this country and won. I am not worried about a town hall with Donald Trump. He tried a different angle. What if he brings something? What if he has documents or evidence or something designed to embarrass you?" She smiled. That grandmother smile. The one that said she knew things other people did not. What could he possibly have? My record is public. My husband's trades are disclosed. Everything is legal. Everything is transparent. Let him bring whatever he wants. I will explain it. I will contextualize it. I will make him look like a bully attacking an elderly woman because he cannot win on policy. Marcus did not bring it up again. He would later tell a reporter, off the record, that he had never seen her so confident about anything. And that confidence was the first thing that died on that stage in Nashville. The production team spent 3 weeks transforming the Grand Ole Opry House into something that looked like a cross between a living room and a courtroom. They removed the traditional stage configuration and built a circular platform in the center of the main floor. 2 chairs, both identical, both upholstered in a neutral gray fabric, both angled slightly toward each other but also toward the audience, which surrounded them in a 3/4 circle, rising in gentle tiers like the seats of a Greek amphitheater. The moderator's position was off to the side, slightly elevated, close enough to be heard but far enough to be out of the way. Behind the chairs, a massive screen, 60 feet wide and 20 feet tall, capable of displaying anything fed to it from either side's technical team. This was Trump's insistence. He wanted a screen. His team had been very specific about it. They wanted it large enough for everyone in the audience to read. They wanted it connected to a system that could display images, charts, documents, videos, anything, at the tap of a phone. Pelosi's team had agreed without much thought. They assumed he would use it to show rally clips or self-congratulatory montages, or maybe a highlight reel of his greatest insults. They did not imagine he would use it to display declassified government documents and stock trading timelines with their client's name on them. The lighting was designed to be warm but clear, bright enough for the cameras but soft enough to feel intimate. The audio system was state-of-the-art, directional microphones that could pick up a whisper from 20 feet away. Speakers positioned so every audience member could hear every word as if it were being spoken directly to them. There were 12 cameras in total, 4 fixed positions covering wide angles, 4 handheld operators for close-ups and reactions, and 4 robotic cameras mounted on tracks that could move silently along the ceiling to capture overhead shots. Every angle was covered. Every facial expression would be visible to 85 million viewers. Every micro-movement, every tightening of the jaw, every flicker of the eyes, every involuntary flinch would be captured and broadcast and replayed and analyzed and memed and shared until the end of time. The audience arrived starting at 4 in the afternoon, 3 hours before the broadcast. They had been selected by Gallup from a pool of over 200,000 applicants. 500 seats, 250 for registered Democrats, 250 for registered Republicans. Each person had been verified, background checked, and briefed on the rules, which were minimal. They could applaud or react naturally. They could ask questions when invited. They could not shout, interrupt, or hold signs. They were seated in alternating sections, Democrats and Republicans mixed together rather than segregated, another deliberate design choice meant to prevent the audience from splitting into opposing cheering sections. It worked for about 20 minutes. The atmosphere before the broadcast was electric, that particular kind of energy that exists only when something genuinely unpredictable is about to happen on live television. People were buzzing, checking their phones, speculating about what would happen. The Democrats in the audience were confident. Pelosi was a master debater, a veteran of 1,000 political knife fights. She would destroy him. The Republicans were excited. Trump was Trump. He always found a way. He always had something up his sleeve. Neither side was wrong. They were just wrong about who would be doing the destroying. 7 o'clock Eastern Time. The red lights on the cameras went live. The studio audience fell silent with that particular hush that descends on a room when people realize they are being watched by millions. The moderator, James Reed, a 20-year veteran of network news known for his deliberate, measured style, his ability to listen rather than perform, his refusal to make himself the story, walked to his position and looked into camera one. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had anchored coverage of wars and elections and natural disasters, and had learned that the most powerful thing a broadcaster could do was simply be present without editorializing. Good evening, America. Tonight we are trying something different. No debate podiums, no strict time limits, no rapid-fire questions designed to produce gotcha moments. Just a conversation between two people who have shaped American politics for decades and who, despite their profound differences, have agreed to sit down together and talk. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Some of you watching tonight believe one of these two people is a hero and the other is a villain. Some of you believe the opposite. Some of you are not sure what you believe anymore. Whatever your perspective, I ask you to listen tonight. Really listen. Not to confirm what you already think, but to hear what is actually said. Gestured to his left, President Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, current president serving in his second term, a businessman who entered politics and changed the landscape of both parties. Trump entered from the left wing. He was dressed in his usual uniform, dark navy suit, white shirt, red tie, the knot a little too wide, the way it always was, the American flag pin on his left lapel catching the studio lights. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was exactly as it always was, that impossible architecture of gold and amber that defied both gravity and explanation. But something was different about him tonight. His walk was slower than usual, not the striding, arm-pumping entrance he made at rallies. This was measured, deliberate. He nodded to the audience, gave a small wave, nothing theatrical. He sat down in his chair and placed 3 items on the small table beside him: his phone, a thin manila folder, and a flash drive, small enough to fit in his palm, that he placed next to the water bottle with the casual precision of someone setting down a loaded weapon. He settled into his chair and crossed his legs and looked around the room with an expression that could only be described as patient. Donald Trump, patient. It was so unusual that several reporters in the press area exchanged glances. Something was different. Reed gestured to his right. Leader Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, representative of California's 11th Congressional District for 37 years, one of the most influential legislators in modern American history, a woman who has been at the center of nearly every major political battle of the last 4 decades. Pelosi entered from the right. She was impeccable. A purple suit, tailored perfectly, with a gold brooch on her left lapel, a piece she had worn to major events for years, an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, the Great Seal of the United States reimagined as jewelry. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. Her posture was straight, shoulders back, chin slightly elevated, the posture of a woman who had spent decades walking into rooms full of people who underestimated her and walking out having bent them to her will. She smiled at the audience, that practiced, warm, slightly condescending smile that had become her trademark. It said, "I am glad to be here." It also said, "I am better than this." She sat down, smoothed her suit jacket, folded her hands in her lap and looked at Trump with an expression of serene superiority. She did not look at the items he had placed on the table. She should have. "Thank you both for being here," Reed continued. "Let us start simply. Leader Pelosi, you have been in public service for nearly 4 decades. What brings you here tonight? What do you hope Americans take away from this conversation?" Pelosi took a small breath. She had rehearsed this answer 50 times with her staff. They had tested it in focus groups. They had refined every word, every pause, every inflection. It was designed to accomplish three things simultaneously. First, establish her as the voice of reason and compassion. Second, subtly frame Trump as the source of America's problems without directly attacking him, which would make her look petty. Third, signal to the Democratic base that she was still fighting, still strong, still the leader they needed. It was, by all objective measures, a masterfully crafted piece of political communication. She delivered it perfectly. James, I have dedicated my life to public service, fighting for working families, for those who do not have a voice in the halls of power, for children who deserve a better future, for the promise of this great country, a promise that says no matter where you come from, no matter how humble your beginnings, you can build a life of dignity and purpose. She let that settle for a moment, her eyes moving across the audience, making contact with individual faces the way she had been trained to do decades ago. And I believe, even in these divided times, that we can find common ground, that we can heal, that we can remember what unites us rather than what divides us. Glanced at Trump. The look was subtle but devastating in its implication. It was the look a teacher gives a misbehaving student, the look a mother gives a child who has disappointed her. It communicated without words that she considered him beneath her, a problem to be managed rather than a peer to be respected. Even with those who have tested our institutions, she continued, even with those who have pushed the boundaries of our democracy, I have always believed in the possibility of redemption. The possibility that even those who have made mistakes, who have put their own interests above the country's, can learn, can grow, can become better. The Democratic side of the audience applauded warmly. This was the Nancy they loved, the wise grandmother, the seasoned warrior who could cut you in half with a smile, the woman who radiated competence and moral authority and just the right amount of righteous indignation. She had the room. She could feel it. The energy was flowing toward her. The cameras were capturing her at her best, poised, dignified, compassionate, the elder stateswoman America needed in these troubled times. Everything was going exactly as planned. Reid turned to Trump. Mr. President, your thoughts? Trump smiled. It was a strange smile, not the one from the rallies, all teeth and aggression and domination. This was smaller, quieter, the smile of someone who knows something no one else in the room knows. The smile of a poker player holding a royal flush while everyone else is betting on pairs. Nancy and I have known each other a long time, he said. His voice was conversational, almost warm. We have had our disagreements. He paused and there were chuckles from both sides of the audience, because disagreements was perhaps the understatement of the century. 2 impeachments, the government shutdown, the torn-up speech, the sarcastic clap, the investigations, the subpoenas, the press conferences where each of them had called the other everything short of a criminal and sometimes not short of it. Disagreements barely scratched the surface. But I respect that she has been in the game a long time, Trump continued. Been very successful, done very well for herself. That last phrase hung in the air for just a second longer than it needed to. Done very well for herself. It could have been a compliment, a gracious acknowledgement of a long career. But the way Trump said it, with just the faintest emphasis on the word herself, there was an edge, a blade wrapped in silk. And Nancy Pelosi, whose political instincts were among the sharpest in Washington, felt it. Her smile tightened, not enough for the audience to notice, not enough for the cameras to catch, but enough. A micro-expression, a fraction of a second where the confidence in her eyes flickered and something else appeared. Not fear, not yet, just awareness. A predator recognizing that another predator had entered the room. Tonight, Trump continued, his voice still easy, still relaxed. I think we should talk about real issues affecting real Americans. The things that actually matter to people. Not political games, not who can give the best speech, not who can get the most applause from their side. Real stuff, costs, jobs, safety, the state of our cities, how people are actually living versus how politicians say they are living. He glanced at Pelosi. Sometimes there is a big gap between those two things. Reid nodded. Let us dive in then. The economy, inflation, cost of living. These are top concerns for Americans right now. Mr. President, your administration has implemented several economic policies that your supporters credit with growth but your critics say have increased inequality. Can you address that? And they were off. The first 20 minutes were, by the standards of what was coming, almost unremarkable, almost normal, almost boring. Questions about inflation and immigration and energy policy and healthcare costs and the deficit, the usual carousel of issues that politicians had been circling for decades without ever actually addressing. Pelosi did her thing. She was good at it. No one could deny that. She talked about fighting for working families, about the middle class that had been squeezed for decades by trickle-down economics and corporate greed and tax cuts for the wealthy, about how some people, and here she would glance at Trump with that subtle, devastating look, inherited wealth, and had never known what it meant to struggle, about the need for billionaires to pay their fair share, a phrase she deployed like a weapon, loading it with moral authority every time, making it sound like the simplest, most obvious thing in the world, as if anyone who disagreed was either stupid or evil. All of it delivered in that grandmother voice, warm but firm, concerned but controlled, the voice of someone who had seen it all and understood it all and was gently, patiently trying to explain it to people who just did not quite get it yet. She was performing beautifully. Her staff, watching from the green room on a bank of monitors, were pleased. This was going exactly as planned. She was establishing dominance through reasonableness, through competence, through the sheer weight of her decades of experience. Trump was responding with policy talk. Numbers about economic growth, about unemployment rates, about wage gains, about manufacturing jobs returning, about energy independence. He cited specific statistics, specific achievements, specific metrics. He was surprisingly measured, not doing his rally routine, not taking her personal bait, not interrupting, not going off on tangents about crowd sizes or media bias or witch hunts, just policy, data, results, almost professional. It was weird. Several commentators, watching on their own screens in studios across the country, noted this in real time. Something is different about Trump tonight, one said. He is being disciplined, another observed. He is not taking the bait, a third noted. They were impressed. They should have been suspicious. Because what they were watching was not discipline. It was strategy. Trump was being calm because calm was the setup. He was being reasonable because reasonable was the foundation. He was letting Pelosi establish herself as the moral authority, the adult, the wise one, the fighter for the people, because when he pulled the rug out, the height from which she fell would be that much greater. Every minute she spent building herself up was a minute she was building the scaffold from which she would hang, and she had no idea. At the 13-minute mark, Pelosi made her first subtle dig about his wealth. Something about how people who had never worried about paying rent probably should not be making housing policy. Trump did not respond to it directly, just mentioned his housing initiatives and moved on. At the 17-minute mark, she implied that his tax cuts had benefited billionaires like himself at the expense of working people. He cited specific numbers about middle-class tax savings and did not engage with the personal element. At the 21-minute mark, she made a veiled reference to his legal troubles, something about how leaders should be held accountable under the law, not above it. He responded by talking about law enforcement funding and did not take the bait. Each time, Pelosi got a little bolder, a little more pointed, a little more comfortable, because he was not fighting back. He was not exploding. He was not doing the thing that Trump always did, that she always counted on him doing, which was to overreact and look unhinged and give her the opportunity to look calm and reasonable by comparison. He was just sitting there, checking his phone occasionally, responding with policy, letting her build her case, letting her construct her narrative of moral superiority, brick by careful brick. And she was getting confident, too confident her staff could see it. Marcus Delgado, watching from the green room, felt his stomach tight. She was going off script. Not wildly, not obviously, but she was ad-libbing, adding little flourishes, little personal touches, improvising digs that had not been in the rehearsals. She was performing. She was enjoying herself. She was having fun. And Marcus had been in politics long enough to know that when a politician starts having fun, they stop being careful. And when they stop being careful, that is when the floor drops out. 23 minutes in, the first real crack appeared. Not in Pelosi's composure, in her armor. James Reed, the moderator, turned to the audience. "We have some questions from our guests tonight. Let us hear from them." A young woman stood up. She was in her late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a simple blazer and jeans. She did not look like a political operative or an activist. She looked like someone who had come straight from work. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she had moved to San Francisco 5 years ago for a software engineering job at a startup in the Mission District. She had applied to be in the audience on a whim, not really expecting to be selected, and certainly not expecting to change the trajectory of American politics with a single question. "My question is for Leader Pelosi," she said. Her voice was steady but nervous, the voice of someone who was not used to speaking in front of millions of people but who had something genuine to say and was determined to say it. "I live in San Francisco. I moved there 5 years ago for a tech job. I love the city. I love the culture, the energy, the diversity, the natural beauty. It is one of the most beautiful places in the world, but it has gotten so much worse since I moved there." She paused. "Homeless encampments everywhere. I mean everywhere. My walk to work takes me past 3 separate encampments, open drug use, people injecting heroin on the sidewalk in broad daylight, human waste on the streets. I have stepped in it, more than once. Car break-ins are so common that people leave their doors unlocked and their glove compartments open so the thieves will not break their windows. My apartment has been broken into twice. My car has been broken into 4 times. I have had 3 friends who have been mugged. My friends are all leaving. Every month someone I know announces they are moving to Austin or Denver or Nashville. They love San Francisco. They just cannot live there anymore." She looked directly at Pelosi. "You have represented San Francisco for 37 years. Why has it not gotten better? Why has it gotten so much worse?" The question was respectful but pointed. It was not hostile. It was not a gotcha. It was just honest. And it hit at the single most vulnerable point in Pelosi's political armor, her district, the city she had represented for nearly 4 decades, the city that had become, fairly or unfairly, a national symbol of progressive policy failure. The city where tech billionaires lived in mansions and homeless people lived in tents on the same block. The city where you could see a Tesla and a needle in the same gutter. The city that Pelosi had been in charge of representing for longer than Sarah Chen had been alive. Pelosi's smile did not waver. She had answered this question before, many times in many settings from many people. She had a formula for it. Acknowledge the concern. Express empathy. Blame systemic forces beyond any individual's control. Pivot to the need for more federal funding and comprehensive solutions. End with hope and determination. It worked every time because it sounded reasonable and compassionate, and because most interviewers did not follow up. "Well, dear," she began, and the word dear landed with a thud that she did not intend. It was a tick, a habit, something she said to younger people automatically, but in this context directed at a young woman who had just described stepping in human feces on her way to work. It sounded condescending, dismissive. Like a grandmother patting a child on the head and telling them not to worry about grown-up things. "I appreciate your concern. These are complex, systemic issues that no single representative can solve alone. Income inequality driven by billionaires who do not pay their fair share. Corporate greed that prices working families out of their homes. Republican obstruction at the state and federal level that prevents us from implementing real solutions. Housing policies that have not kept up with population growth. The opioid crisis that pharmaceutical companies bear enormous responsibility for. The failure of mental health systems that have been defunded for decades. Climate change that displaces vulnerable populations. Immigration challenges that are the result of failed federal policy." She went on for almost 3 minutes. 3 minutes of systemic analysis and root causes and comprehensive solutions, and more federal funding and bipartisan cooperation and long-term investment, and all the other phrases that politicians use when they do not want to answer a question. She blamed everyone. Billionaires, corporations, Republicans, pharmaceutical companies, housing developers, the federal government, the state government, climate change, the opioid epidemic, immigration, income inequality, capitalism itself. Everyone and everything except the one person who had actually been in charge of representing that district for 37 years. When she finally finished, there was polite applause from the Democratic side. The kind of applause you give when someone has said the right things in the right order with the right tone, even if they have not actually answered the question. But Sarah Chen, the young woman who had asked, was frowning. Not angrily, not rudely, just honestly. The frown of someone who had asked a genuine question and received a press release in response. That was not really an answer, she said quietly. That was a list of excuses. The words landed like a stone in a still pond. The audience felt it. Reed felt it. The cameras caught it. And Trump, who had been sitting quietly through this entire exchange, checking his phone occasionally, looking for all the world like a man who was slightly bored by the proceedings, looked up. His eyes were different now. Sharper, more focused. The patience was still there, but there was something else behind it. Anticipation. The look of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment and recognizes it when it arrives. "Nancy," he said. His voice was conversational, almost gentle. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to him, surprised by the request. He usually interrupted. He usually barged in. He usually made it about himself. He did not ask permission. The politeness was disorienting. "Sure, Donald. You have been in Congress since when?" 1987. 1987, yes. That is 37 years representing San Francisco. Same district, more or less, with some boundary changes. 37 years. What did your district look like when you started versus what it looks like now? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Just a fraction. The way they did when she sensed danger but had not yet identified its source. I think the question is overly simplistic, Donald. You cannot reduce 40 years of complex urban dynamics to a before and after comparison. Humor me. He leaned forward slightly. I built buildings in cities my whole life. I know something about urban development, about what makes a neighborhood work, about what makes it fall apart. I have seen cities improve and I have seen cities decline. I have opinions about why. What has changed in your district in 37 years? Donald, you would not understand the complexities of urban governance. You were a real estate developer. That is not the same thing. Try me. Trump's voice was still easy, still relaxed, but his hand moved to his phone, and with that small gesture so casual that most people in the audience did not even register it, the trap began to close. He tapped the screen a few times. The massive display behind them came to life, and what appeared was not a political attack ad or a campaign montage or a self-congratulatory highlight reel. It was footage, local news footage, raw, unedited. Shot by camera crews from San Francisco's own television stations, the local affiliates that covered the city every day, the reporters who walked those streets and filmed what they saw. "This is your district," Trump said. "The Tenderloin today, this week." Shot by local news crews from your own city, not conservative media, not Fox News, your city's own journalists. The footage played, and it was devastating, not because it was propaganda. Not because it was selectively edited or misleadingly framed, but because it was real. Tents lining entire blocks, stretching as far as the camera could see, blue and gray tarps hung over shopping carts and milk crates, creating a permanent shantytown in the heart of one of the wealthiest cities on earth. People openly injecting drugs on the sidewalk, in broad daylight, 10 feet from a bus stop where commuters waited with their eyes fixed on their phones, trained by years of exposure to not see what was happening right in front of them. Human feces visible on the concrete, dried and fresh. A biohazard so common that the city had created an app where residents could report it. An app that received an average of 70 reports per day. Broken needles in the gutters, glinting in the California sun like tiny amber daggers. Boarded up businesses with for lease signs in the windows. Entire blocks that had once been thriving commercial corridors, now dead zones of plywood and graffiti. A woman stepping over an unconscious body on her way to work, not stopping, not looking down, not calling for help, because this was normal now. This was just Tuesday. This was what it meant to live in Nancy Pelosi's district in the year of our Lord 2025. The audience watched in silence, complete silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your eardrums, that makes you aware of your own breathing. Even the Democrats, even the people who had come to this town hall to cheer for Pelosi and boo Trump, even they could not look away. Because this was not partisan. This was not a matter of opinion. This was a city that had been represented by the same person for 37 years. A city that was falling apart. A city where people lived in tents surrounded by their own waste, while their representative lived in a mansion in Pacific Heights. Trump let the footage play for 30 seconds, an eternity on live television. 30 seconds of silence broken only by the ambient sounds of the footage itself, the distant sirens, the muttering of people lost in drug-induced hazes, the flutter of tent fabric in the wind. Then he tapped his phone again. The screen changed. Now this is San Francisco in 1987, the year you took office. Different footage, old film, grainy, the colors washed out with the patina of the late 1980s, but clear enough to see what mattered. Golden Gate Park filled with families having picnics on green grass under blue sky. Clean streets in the financial district, business people walking briskly, storefronts open and busy. Fisherman's Wharf bustling with tourists buying sourdough bread and taking photographs of the bay. Small businesses thriving in the Mission District, their windows painted with vibrant murals, their doors propped open to let in the sea breeze. Children playing in neighborhood parks, running through sprinklers, climbing jungle gyms, their laughter audible even on the old film stock. People walking freely without fear, without looking over their shoulders, without scanning the ground for needles, without holding their bags tight against their bodies. The contrast was brutal, not subtle, not nuanced, not something that required explanation or context or a 3-minute speech about systemic forces. It was simply two images, the same city, the same district before and after, before Nancy Pelosi and after Nancy Pelosi. Trump let both videos sit on the split screen for a long moment. The audience stared. Then he spoke, his voice conversational, almost curious, the tone of a man who genuinely wanted to understand something. Homelessness in your district is up 400% since you took office. Drug overdose deaths up 800%. Business closures in the Tenderloin and surrounding areas up 60% just in the past decade. Property crime up 300%. Violent crime up 170%. Quality of life complaints to the city up 500%. He paused. These are official city statistics, Nancy. From San Francisco's own reports. From the city's own data. Not from conservative media, not from Republican think tanks, from your city. He let that land, all in your district, the one you have represented for almost 40 years, while you have been fighting for the people. Pelosi opened her mouth to respond. The instinct to counterpunch was strong, trained into her by decades of political combat, but Trump was not done, and I am not cherry-picking. Let me show you other cities for comparison, because I know you are going to say this is a national trend, that it is happening everywhere, that it is not your fault. He tapped his phone again. The screen filled with a comparative chart. Simple, clean, devastating. Austin, Texas, also grew massively, also became a tech hub, also experienced population growth and housing pressure. Homelessness up 40%, bad, but not 400%. Nashville, Tennessee, growing city. New businesses, new residents, new challenges. Homelessness up 32%. Portland, Oregon, everyone talks about Portland. Liberal city, progressive policies, significant challenges. Homelessness up 110%. Worse than Austin and Nashville. Not as bad as San Francisco. Denver, Colorado, growing tech hub, population surge. Homelessness up 55%. He put his phone down and looked at her. San Francisco is special, Nancy. Not in a good way, especially bad, especially broken. And you have been in charge the whole time. For 37 years, you have been the one representing these people, the one with the power to direct resources, the one with the influence to shape policy, the one with the connections to bring federal attention and federal money to your district. So I am just curious. I am not attacking. I am genuinely asking. What happened? What did you do for 37 years while your city fell apart? The room was silent. 500 people in the audience. Millions watching at home. Cameras tight on Pelosi's face. She was still smiling. She had not lost the smile. It was muscle memory at this point, an involuntary response, a defense mechanism so deeply ingrained that it activated regardless of the situation, regardless of how she actually felt. But it looked different now. It looked frozen, forced. The warmth had drained out of it, replaced by something rigid and glassy. Her eyes were not matching the smile anymore. Her eyes were calculating, scanning, searching for the response that would diffuse this, that would redirect, that would turn the conversation back to safe ground. But there was no safe ground. Trump had just put her city on the screen, her city. Not an abstraction, not a policy debate, not a theoretical discussion about systemic forces. Her city, the one she had been paid to represent for 37 years. And it was in ruins. "Donald," she said. Her voice was controlled but tight. "This is exactly what you always do. Oversimplify complex issues. Ignore the broader economic forces at play." The broader economic forces, Trump repeated. That hit Austin and Nashville and Denver and Portland, but somehow hit San Francisco 10 times harder, those forces. He did not say it sarcastically. He did not mock her. He just repeated what she said and let the audience draw their own conclusions. It was more effective than any insult. "You are cherry-picking statistics," she said, her voice rising slightly, losing the grandmother warmth, showing the steel underneath. "You are using selective data to distract from your own record of corruption, and—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The word was out, corruption. She had said it. She had gone there. She had opened the door. And Trump walked through it like a man who had been waiting outside that particular door for 6 months with the key in his hand. "My corruption?" Trump's eyebrows went up. That amused smile appeared again. The one that meant he knew something. The one that meant you had just stepped exactly where he wanted you to step. "Let us talk about corruption, Nancy. Let us talk about how you got rich." And just like that, as simply as that, as casually as opening a window to let in a breeze, the trap was fully and completely and irrevocably sprung. The audience leaned forward, 500 bodies shifting in their seats simultaneously, unconsciously, drawn toward the center of the room by a force they could not name. This was it. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, even the people who did not know they were waiting for it. The gloves were coming off. The pleasantries were over. Whatever had been building in the first 23 minutes, whatever strange discipline Trump had been exercising, whatever patience he had been deploying was about to bear fruit. The air in the room changed, thickened, charged. You could feel it on your skin. Reed, the moderator, saw it coming. He had been a journalist for 20 years. He recognized the moment a conversation became a confrontation. He tried to intervene. "Mr. President, I think we should maintain a respectful and constructive—" "I am being respectful," Trump said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "Not rude, not aggressive, just firm. I am asking a legitimate question. Nancy has been in Congress 37 years. Her salary has never exceeded $223,000 a year, even as Speaker. That is public record. Anyone can look it up." He paused. "Yet her net worth is estimated at $200 million. Some estimates put it higher. $240 million. He let the number sit there. $240 million. It was an enormous figure. A figure that was almost impossible to reconcile with a government salary. A figure that required explanation. "That is a lot of money," Trump said, his voice still conversational, still reasonable for someone who has been on a government salary their whole career. "I am not attacking. I am just curious how that happens. How do you make $200 million on a $200,000 salary? I am a businessman. I am good at math. That math does not work." Pelosi had her rehearsed answer ready. She had been asked this before, by conservative media, by Fox News hosts looking for a fight, by Republican opponents trying to score points. She had a smooth, polished response that she had deployed dozens of times, a response that acknowledged her wealth without apologizing for it, that directed attention to her husband's career without providing details, that made the question seem inappropriate and slightly sexist. "My husband, Paul," she said, her voice regaining some of its practiced warmth, "is a very successful businessman and investor. He has built his wealth over decades through smart investments and hard work, long before I entered politics. His financial success is his own. I am very proud of him. And I find it unfortunate that successful women are always asked to justify their family's wealth, as if—" "Successful investor," Trump interrupted, nodding. "Yeah, he is very successful. Let us talk about that." He picked up his phone again and tapped. The screen behind them changed. What appeared was not a single image but a comprehensive chart, a timeline. On the left side in blue were dates and descriptions of stock purchases made by Paul Pelosi. On the right side in red were dates and descriptions of legislative actions, government announcements, or committee meetings involving Nancy Pelosi. Between them, lines connecting each trade to its corresponding government action, creating a visual web that looked like a conspiracy board from a detective movie, except that every single item on it was sourced from public records, official government documents, and legally required financial disclosure forms. December 2020, Trump read, his voice measured and clear. Paul Pelosi buys $5 million in Tesla call options. Aggressive bet. Options, not stock. Means he was betting Tesla would go up significantly in a specific time frame. He pointed to the other side of the chart. January 2021. Biden administration announces major electric vehicle initiative, massive infrastructure bill with EV charging stations across the country. Tesla, the dominant electric vehicle manufacturer, sees its stock soar. Paul sells. Profit $3.2 million. He looked at her. Coincidence? Just asking. Pelosi's smile was completely gone now. I do not discuss my husband's private investments, she said. I have no involvement in his trading decisions. We maintain a strict separation between my legislative duties and his business activities. This has been well documented. And December 2021, Trump continued, pulling up another chart. Paul buys $4.5 million in Microsoft stock. January 2022. The Pentagon awards Microsoft a $22 billion contract for cloud computing services. Defense contract. You sit on a committee that had oversight of that contract, a committee that had to approve funding for that type of initiative. You voted yes. Microsoft stock jumps 25%. Paul sells. Profit $1.1 million. He looked at her again. Another coincidence. This is a witch hunt, she said. The words came out harder than she intended, sharper, the grandmother veneer cracking. June 2020, Trump continued undeterred. Disney stock, $2 million. July 2020. You champion COVID relief legislation that includes specific provisions benefiting the entertainment industry, theme parks, movie theaters, production companies. Disney, the largest entertainment company in the world, recovers faster than anyone expected. Paul sells. Profit $1.7 million. Another chart appeared on the screen. March 2021. Nvidia stock. $3.5 million. April 2021. You publicly champion artificial intelligence regulation that favors established chip makers, including Nvidia, creating regulatory barriers that protect them from smaller competitors. Nvidia stock rises 60%. Paul sells. Profit $5.2 million. July 2021. Alphabet, Google's parent company, $6 million in stock. August 2021. You publicly oppose antitrust legislation that would have broken up big tech companies. The legislation dies. Google's stock stabilizes and rises. Paul sells. Profit $2.8 million. Trump put down his phone and leaned back in his chair. On the screen behind them was the full chart, the comprehensive list. Every major stock trade Paul Pelosi had made during Nancy Pelosi's time in leadership positions. Beside each trade, the legislative action or government announcement that had affected that stock. The timing, the profit. Trade after trade after trade, each one timed with uncanny precision to precede government actions that Nancy Pelosi either influenced, voted on, or had advanced knowledge of. The bottom line was highlighted in bold red text. Documented timing-related profits from trades during Nancy Pelosi's leadership tenure, $42 million. Nancy, Trump said, his voice still conversational, still just asking questions, still performing reasonableness the way she had been performing moral authority in the private sector. We call this insider trading. When someone in a company trades stock based on information the public does not have, they go to prison. Martha Stewart went to prison for a $45,000 trade. $45,000. Your husband made $42 million. He shook his head. Your husband has a really special talent. He buys stocks right before things you know about happen, things that move markets, and he does it over and over and over. Not once, not twice, systematically, for years. His success rate on options trades is 76%. He paused for effect. Do you know what Warren Buffett's success rate is? Pelosi said nothing. Her hands were gripping the armrests of her chair. Her knuckles were white. 68%. Warren Buffett, the best investor in the history of the world, the Oracle of Omaha, The man who has spent 70 years studying markets and building the most successful investment firm ever created. His success rate on comparable trades is 68%. Your husband beats him by 8 points. He is better than Warren Buffett. He tilted his head. What is his secret, Nancy? What does Paul Pelosi know that Warren Buffett does not? Could it be that Paul Pelosi is married to the Speaker of the House of Representatives? Could it be that he has access, through you, to information about upcoming legislation, about government contracts, about regulatory decisions, information that other investors would pay millions to have, information that other investors go to prison for trading on? The audience was riveted, not making a sound. 500 people holding their collective breath, half of them nodding, their suspicions confirmed, the thing they had been saying for years finally being said out loud on a stage with evidence behind it. Half of them shocked, their champion, their fighter, their moral authority, sitting there unable to respond to a series of charts and timelines and numbers that told a story no amount of rhetoric could undo. And all of them watching, all of them transfixed. Because this was not a debate about policy or values or ideology. This was about money, about specific trades on specific dates yielding specific profits timed to specific government actions. This was about receipts. Pelosi's hands were still gripping the armrests. Her knuckles were still white. She spoke, and her voice had an edge that had not been there before, a sharpness that cut through the grandmother veneer like a knife through silk. This is a coordinated attack, a pre-planned political hit designed to. These are public records, Trump said, his voice still calm, still level, the calmness itself a weapon because it contrasted so starkly with her rising agitation. Your husband's trades are disclosed, required by law. The dates are facts. The legislative actions are facts. They are in the congressional record. The profits are calculated from public stock prices. Anyone with a computer can verify every single number on that screen. I am not attacking Nancy. I am just asking. How does your husband know what to buy and when? Reid, the moderator, tried to intervene, to throw Pelosi a lifeline, to redirect the conversation to safer waters. Mr. President, these trades are legal under current law. Members of Congress and their families are permitted to. Trump turned to him, and he asked a question so simple, so devastating, so perfectly timed that it would be replayed millions of times in the days that followed. You know who wrote that law? Who has been in charge of whether that law changes? Who has personally opposed every single bill introduced to ban congressional stock trading? He pointed to Pelosi without looking at her. The person sitting right there. He turned back to the audience. She opposes banning congressional stock trading. Every bill, every amendment, every proposal to stop members of Congress from trading stocks based on information they get from their positions, she has blocked, delayed, watered down, or voted against. Wonder why? Could it be the $42 million, the mansions, the vineyard in Napa, the $48,000 refrigerators? He turned back to Pelosi, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter, more serious, stripped of the amusement and the casual curiosity, replaced by something harder, something that sounded almost like genuine anger, though whether it was real or performed was impossible to tell with Trump. Nancy, you lecture billionaires about paying their fair share, about greed, about corruption, about how the wealthy are rigging the system against ordinary Americans. You have built your entire brand, your entire career, on being the person who fights against exactly this kind of thing. But you made $42 million on stock trades that just happened to come right before things you knew were going to happen because of your position in government. How is that not corruption? How is that not the exact thing you have spent 40 years telling America you are fighting against? For the first time in the town hall, for the first time in perhaps decades of public appearances, Nancy Pelosi had no smooth answer, no prepared response. No condescending smile followed by a grandmother wisdom comeback that made the questioner look foolish and her look wise. She just stared at the chart on the screen, at the timeline, at the lines connecting her husband's trades to her legislative actions, connecting purchase dates to announcement dates, connecting money flowing in to political actions flowing out, creating a web that was impossible to explain as coincidence and impossible to deny as fact. And Trump, sensing the moment the way a shark senses blood, The way a comedian senses when the audience is ready for the punchline. The way a predator senses when its prey has stopped running, went in for more. "Let me show you something else," Trump said. His tone shifted again, gentler now, almost wistful, the tone of someone sharing an observation that makes them sad rather than angry. "You did an interview during COVID in your kitchen. Remember that?" He did not wait for her to answer. He tapped his phone. The screen changed. The massive display behind them now showed a clip from 2020. Nancy Pelosi, in her kitchen, being interviewed by a late-night television host during the early months of the COVID lockdowns, when millions of Americans were losing their jobs and losing their homes and losing their minds in cramped apartments and overcrowded houses, trying to homeschool their children and apply for unemployment benefits and figure out how they were going to pay rent when their industry had been shut down by government order. And there was Nancy Pelosi standing in her kitchen. Not a kitchen, the kind of kitchen that belonged in the pages of Architectural Digest, the kind of kitchen that most Americans had only seen on home renovation shows hosted by people with unnaturally white teeth. Massive, gleaming, professional grade, marble countertops that probably cost more than most people's cars, custom cabinetry in a warm cream color, appliances that were not appliances but monuments to the possibility of cooking as an art form practiced by people for whom money was not an object, and the refrigerators, not a refrigerator, two refrigerators, both sub-zero, both enormous, both brushed stainless steel, both filled to capacity with designer ice cream. She was opening them, showing them off, pulling out pints of Jenny's splendid ice creams which retailed for $12 each. "I think we all deserve a treat," Television Nancy was saying, her smile wide and genuine, and completely disconnected from the reality that was happening outside her mansion walls, the reality of unemployment lines stretching around city blocks, the reality of families choosing between food and medicine, the reality of small businesses closing permanently, the reality of 22 million Americans who had lost their jobs in the span of 2 months. The camera in the original interview had panned across the kitchen. Trump's production team had slowed it down, let every detail register. The 6-burner professional range, the built-in espresso machine, the wine cooler, the marble, the custom tile backsplash, the lighting fixtures that looked like they had been designed by someone whose name you would find in a museum, and at the bottom of the screen in clean white text, captions that Trump's team had added. Sub-Zero Model 648 Prague refrigerator. Retail price $24,000. Quantity 2. Total $48,000. That interview went viral, Trump said. Not in a good way. Because when you showed off your expensive ice cream and your $48,000 refrigerators in your mansion kitchen, there were 22 million Americans unemployed because of COVID lockdowns that you championed. Millions of people could not pay rent, could not feed their kids, could not see their dying parents in hospitals, could not keep their businesses alive, could not make their car payments, could not afford groceries. And you were on national television, showing off gourmet ice cream in a kitchen that cost more than most Americans' houses. He tapped his phone again. The screen split. On the left, Pelosi's mansion kitchen, gleaming marble and stainless steel and $12 ice cream. On the right, a photograph, a homeless encampment, tents clustered on a sidewalk, trash bags piled against a chain-link fence, a shopping cart overflowing with someone's entire worldly possessions, a man lying on a piece of cardboard, his face turned away from the camera, his body covered with a thin blanket despite the visible cold. "Want to know where this is?" Trump asked, pointing to the encampment photograph. "Tenderloin District, San Francisco, 2.3 miles from your house, 15-minute drive, both in your district." The contrast was obscene. Not just visually, though visually it was devastating, the split screen creating an image that would haunt Pelosi's political legacy forever, but conceptually, morally. The woman who claimed to fight for the little guy, the champion of working families, the voice of the voiceless, standing in a kitchen that cost more than most Americans would earn in 5 years, showing off ice cream that cost more per pint than some families spent on dinner, while 15 minutes down the road, in the district she represented, people were sleeping on cardboard. You have represented these people for 37 years, Nancy. Trump's voice was steady. And this is what happened. They got tense. You got $48,000 refrigerators. They got needles and feces on their sidewalks. You got marble countertops and designer ice cream. They got worse. You got richer. He shook his head. And you lecture billionaires about inequality. Pelosi tried to fight back. This is an attack on a successful woman, she said, and there was real anger in her voice now, the composure cracking further, the politician being replaced by the person, the calculated responses giving way to raw, unscripted emotion. You are trying to shame me for being successful, for having nice things. This is exactly the kind of misogynistic. No, Trump said firmly, cutting her off without raising his voice, which was somehow more effective than shouting would have been. This is not an attack on a successful woman. This is asking how you became successful. Those are very different things. I have no problem with success. I love success. I am a successful person. I built towers, created jobs, took risks with my own money on projects that might fail. I can show you every building with my name on it, every project I developed, every deal I made. I created tangible things, buildings that people live and work in, developments that transformed neighborhoods, thousands of jobs. I made my money in the private sector, competing in a free market, risking my own capital. He looked at her. How did you make your money, Nancy? Trading stocks using information your position gave you, getting your vineyard from a developer who needed your votes, opposing legislation that would have stopped the gravy train. He was not yelling, was not being bombastic, was not doing the Trump thing that gave his opponents ammunition, the bluster and the bullying and the name-calling that allowed them to dismiss him as undignified and unserious. He was just asking questions, calmly, quietly, with evidence on the screen behind him. And that made it worse. That made it so much worse. Because you cannot dismiss a question as a political attack when the person asking it is calm and the evidence is on a 60-foot screen in front of 85 million people. Let us talk about your vineyard, Trump continued. Beautiful property in Napa Valley. I have seen pictures. Gorgeous. $25 million valuation now, according to the county assessor's office. You and Paul bought it in 2008 for $3.5 million. Know what else happened in 2008? Pelosi said nothing. She had stopped trying to interrupt, stopped trying to redirect. She was sitting very still now, her hands still gripping the armrests, her body tense, her eyes fixed on Trump with an expression that was no longer superiority or condescension, but something closer to the way a small animal looks at a larger animal that it has just realized is not friendly. Trump pulled out actual documents this time, not from his phone, from the manila folder on the table, property records. He held them up to the camera, then placed them on the screen behind him, printed, official, stamped with county seals. You bought that vineyard the same year you championed legislation protecting the wine industry from certain federal taxes. The Wine Equity Act, it was called. Beautiful name. The vote happened in July. You bought the vineyard in September, 2 months later. Very convenient timing. And the price, $3.5 million for a property that comparable sales in the area suggested was worth at least $6 million. You got a deal, Nancy. A big deal. Almost too good a deal. He showed another document. And who sold it to you? A developer named Richard Benson, real estate developer based in San Francisco. Know what Richard Benson was doing in San Francisco at the time? He was trying to get approval for a massive development project. 300 units of luxury condos in the south of Market District. Needed zoning changes, needed permits, needed variances from the City Planning Commission. And guess who voted for those zoning changes? Guess whose office sent letters of support for the project? He pointed at her. You. You voted for zoning changes that benefited the same man who sold you a vineyard at a below-market price 2 months later. Another coincidence. The vineyard's current value is $25 million. That is a 600% return in 15 years, all while you have been in Congress, all while you have been claiming to fight income inequality. He leaned forward. Nancy, you lecture billionaires about paying their fair share. You give speeches about how the wealthy rig the system. You champion legislation that raises taxes on working Americans. What is your fair share? How much tax did you pay on that vineyard appreciation? On your stock gains? On your husband's perfectly timed trades? Are you paying your fair share? Or are you using the same tax strategies and loopholes that you lecture other wealthy people about? The moderator, James Reed, whose job was becoming increasingly impossible, tried to regain control of the proceedings. Perhaps we should move to another topic, he said. There are many important issues facing Americans today, and I think the audience would benefit from. But Nancy Pelosi made her fatal mistake. The mistake that Trump had been setting up since the moment the town hall began. The mistake he had been waiting for, cultivating, creating the conditions for, like a gardener preparing soil for a specific seed. Instead of letting it go, instead of pivoting to health care or education or climate change, instead of taking the lifeline Reed was offering her, she tried to attack back. She tried to change the subject to the one thing she believed was her trump card, the ace she had been holding in reserve, the weapon she was certain would destroy him as completely as he was trying to destroy her. "Let us talk about your corruption, Donald," she said. Her voice was sharp now, hard. The grandmother was gone. The stateswoman was gone. This was the Nancy Pelosi who had torn up Trump's State of the Union speech on live television. The Nancy Pelosi who had announced his impeachment with the grim satisfaction of a judge passing sentence. The Nancy Pelosi who had spent years building the narrative that Donald Trump was the most corrupt, the most dangerous, the most unfit president in American history. Let us talk about January 6th, the insurrection you incited, the attack on the Capitol, the people who died because of your lies, the police officers who were beaten, the democratic process that was nearly destroyed. Let us talk about that, Donald. And Trump smiled, because she had just walked into the biggest trap of all, the trap he had spent the most time preparing, the trap that was not about money or stocks or vineyards, but about the single event that Nancy Pelosi had used more than any other to define him, to condemn him, to justify every action she had ever taken against him. The event she had built a committee around. The event she had turned into a primetime television spectacle. The event she believed was the unassailable proof of everything she had ever said about him. January 6th. "Oh good," Trump said, sitting up straighter, his eyes bright, that amused smile wider now, the smile of a man who has just been given exactly the gift he wanted. "Let us talk about January 6th. I am glad you brought that up. I was hoping you would bring that up." He picked up his phone, but this time before he tapped, he paused, looked directly at the audience. "What I am about to show you has been classified until very recently. I spent 6 months working with the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the National Archives, and multiple intelligence agencies to get these documents declassified. They were released to the public 1 hour before this town hall started. They are available right now on the White House website for anyone to read. Everything I am about to show you is official, documented, verified, not my opinion, not political spin. Government documents with government seals and government stamps." He tapped. The screen filled with a document. It was on Department of Defense letterhead. It bore the official seal of the Secretary of Defense. It was dated January 3rd, 2021, 3 days before January 6th. It was addressed to the office of the Speaker of the House, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi. He read from the document on screen, slowly, clearly, every word landing like a stone dropped into still water. Quote, "At the direction of the President of the United States, the Department of Defense is prepared to deploy up to 10,000 National Guard troops to the United States Capitol complex to ensure security during the January 6th Electoral College certification proceedings. Intelligence assessments indicate the potential for significant protest activity. The department recommends a visible security presence to deter potential violence and ensure the safety of members of Congress, staff, and the public. Please advise if this deployment is requested, and we will coordinate with Capitol Police and other relevant agencies." End quote. Looked at Pelosi. Then he tapped his phone again. Another document appeared. This one was a response from the Office of the Speaker, dated January 4th, 2021. 1 day later, he read it. Quote, "Deployment not necessary at this time. The Speaker's office is concerned about the optics of a significant military presence at the Capitol during what should be a routine democratic proceeding. Such a deployment could send the wrong message and inflame tensions rather than reduce them. We recommend the standard Capitol Police presence, with the possibility of reviewing the situation closer to the date." End quote. Trump put down his phone. The two documents sat on the screen side by side. The offer, the refusal, both official, both dated, both bearing the appropriate seals and signatures, both irrefutably real. "I offered you 10,000 troops," Nancy, Trump said. His voice was harder now. Not angry, not shouting, but harder. The conversational ease was gone. This was serious. This was the point. 3 days before January 6th, I directed the Department of Defense to offer you 10,000 National Guard troops to protect the Capitol. Your office said no. Your office said you were worried about optics. Optics. He let the word hang. 2 days later, the Capitol was breached. People died. Police officers were injured, and you blamed me. You stood in front of cameras and said I was responsible. You launched investigations. You impeached me. You built a committee. You held primetime hearings. You made it the centerpiece of your political legacy, all while knowing that I had offered you 10,000 troops and you had said no. Pelosi was shaking her head. That is taken completely out of context. The security of the Capitol is the responsibility of multiple agencies and— "What context?" Trump asked, genuinely, his palms open. "What context makes this look better for you? I offered military protection. You rejected it. Then when the security you were responsible for failed, you blamed me. You investigated me. You impeached me. Help me understand the context that makes that okay." More documents appeared on the screen. Trump was scrolling through them now, a seemingly endless collection of official communications, memos, reports, testimony transcripts, all bearing the stamps and seals of government agencies, all recently declassified. "Speaking of that committee," he said, "the January 6th committee, the one you chaired, the one you handpicked every single member of, the one where you excluded the Republicans that Kevin McCarthy wanted on it because they might ask questions you did not like, the one that held primetime hearings with professional television producers making it look like a documentary. Let us talk about what that committee actually did." New documents appeared. Internal communications from the committee, meeting notes, emails between staff members, video logs showing what footage had been reviewed, cataloged, and in some cases deleted from the committee's files. Video footage showing Capitol Police officers removing barriers, waving people through, opening doors, directing crowds toward the building rather than away from it. "Your committee deleted those videos," Trump said, "did not include them in your report, did not show them in your primetime hearings, did not mention them. Thousands of hours of footage. Your committee selected the footage that supported your narrative and buried the footage that did not." Phone records appeared on screen. Communications between committee staff and major media outlets, dated before the committee had even held its first public hearing. Your staff was coordinating with journalists, feeding them stories, shaping the narrative before the investigation even started. You had already decided what the conclusion was going to be. The committee was not an investigation. It was a production, a television show designed to reach a predetermined verdict. Testimony transcripts appeared, pages and pages of them, some with sections highlighted in yellow. Security officials, Capitol Police commanders, Department of Defense liaisons, people who had testified behind closed doors, people whose testimony had never been made public, people who had told the committee things it did not want to hear. Testimony from security officials saying you personally refused additional security in the weeks before January 6th, Trump said. Your committee would not allow them to testify publicly. Their testimony was sealed. Their statements were excluded from the final report. Do you know why? Because they said things like this. He read from a highlighted section. Quote, "I informed the Speaker's office on December 28th that we had intelligence suggesting organized groups planned to breach the Capitol perimeter. I recommended activating the National Guard. I was told the Speaker did not want a military presence and that the standard security plan was sufficient." End quote. He read from another. Quote, "On January 4th, I personally briefed the Speaker's Chief of Staff on specific threats we had identified, including communications between protest organizers discussing the layout of the Capitol building. I was told my concerns were noted, but that the decision had been made to rely on Capitol Police. End quote. Trump's voice was harder now, carrying a weight of genuine anger, or something that looked very much like it. You ran a show trial, Nancy. You decided what the conclusion was before you started. You destroyed evidence that did not fit your narrative. You suppressed witnesses who contradicted your story. You excluded committee members who might ask uncomfortable questions. You coordinated with media to shape public perception before a single hearing was held. Then you had the audacity, the sheer brazen audacity, to call it a search for truth. He held up the declassification documents, a thick sheaf of paper bearing red stamps. I spent 6 months getting all of this declassified. Every request for security that your office denied. Every piece of evidence your committee buried. Every witness you would not allow to speak publicly. Every video you deleted. Every communication between your staff and the media. All of it, public now. Posted online an hour before this town hall started. Anyone watching this can go read it right now. Tonight. All of it. Pelosi's face had undergone a transformation that was almost physical, almost chemical, like watching a substance change states. From the pink of controlled anger to a pallor that the stage lights could not mask. The blood had drained from her face. Her hands, which had been gripping the armrests, were now in her lap, clasped tightly, the fingers interlaced, squeezing. This was not how this was supposed to go. January 6th was supposed to be her weapon, her unassailable moral ground. The trump card that ended every argument, that silenced every critic, that justified every action she had ever taken against him. And he had turned it around. He had shown that she had refused his offer of protection. He had shown that her committee had buried evidence. He had shown that witnesses had been silenced and videos had been deleted and the narrative had been crafted rather than discovered. You want to talk about corruption, Trump said, about rigging the system, about destroying evidence, about abusing power. You literally ran a congressional committee that deleted video footage, buried testimony, suppressed witnesses, excluded opposing voices, and coordinated with media to reach a predetermined conclusion. Then you called it a search for truth. Then you called it justice. Then you used it to impeach me. He shook his head. That is not truth-seeking, Nancy. That is a cover-up. You covered up your own security failures by blaming me. You destroyed evidence to do it. And you used the full power of Congress to make it happen. The audience was stunned into absolute crushing silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound but a presence of its own, a force pressing against every person in the room, making it hard to breathe, making it hard to think, making it impossible to look away. Even the Democrats who had been supportive earlier, who had applauded Pelosi's opening statement, who had nodded along with her speeches about fighting for working families, they did not know what to say. Because Trump was not just making accusations. He was not doing the thing they could dismiss, the bluster and the name-calling and the exaggeration. He was showing documents, official government documents, with official seals and declassification stamps. Documents that had been hidden from the public for years. Documents that told a story very different from the one they had been told. Documents that could not be fact-checked away or contextualized into irrelevance or dismissed as partisan spin. And Pelosi had no response, no explanation for why she had refused National Guard troops 3 days before the breach, no defense for her committee destroying evidence, no justification for witnesses being suppressed, no answer for any of it. She sat there, mouth opening and closing slightly, like a fish pulled from water, searching for oxygen in an environment that suddenly contained none, looking for the words that would fix this, that would explain this, that would make the documents on the screen behind her say something different than what they said. And Trump, reading the moment with the instinct of a performer who has spent a lifetime understanding audiences, who knows when to push and when to pull, when to attack and when to let the evidence speak for itself, went in for what could only be described as the kill. Not a physical kill, not a cruel kill, almost a merciful one. The way a surgeon removes a tumor with precision and purpose, causing pain in the service of truth. You know what I find interesting, Nancy? Trump's voice was conversational again, calm again, almost friendly again. The emotional range he had displayed over the past 47 minutes had been remarkable, from casual curiosity to righteous anger to gentle observation, each shift perfectly calibrated to the moment, each one landing exactly as intended. For 40 years, you have positioned yourself as the defender of truth, the fighter against corruption, the public servant who cares about regular people while greedy billionaires destroy America. That has been your brand, your entire political identity. Nancy Pelosi, fighter for the people. He picked up his phone one more time. So let us review what we have learned tonight. Let us go through it piece by piece. Let us see if that brand holds up. He began counting on his fingers. Each point delivered clearly, precisely, like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument to a jury that was already convinced but needed to hear it one more time to be certain. 1. You have represented San Francisco for 37 years. In that time, it has become one of the most unequal cities in America. Homelessness up 400%, drug overdose deaths up 800%, small businesses closing in record numbers, property crime through the roof, streets covered in tents and needles and human waste, people afraid to walk to work, all under your watch, all in your district, while you told everyone you were fighting for them. 2. You make $223,000 a year. You are worth $200 to $240 million. Your husband makes stock trades that are perfectly timed with legislation you influence. $42 million in documented profits from trades that precede government actions you had advanced knowledge of. You oppose every bill to ban congressional stock trading. Your husband's success rate beats Warren Buffett's by 8 points. And you say it is all coincidence. All just smart investing. 3. You live in a mansion in Pacific Heights. You own a $25 million vineyard in Napa that you bought from a developer who needed your votes. You own $48,000 in refrigerators and showed off designer ice cream during COVID while 22 million Americans were unemployed, while your constituents lived in tents 15 minutes from your front door. 4. You refused 10,000 National Guard troops 3 days before January 6th. The Capitol was breached. People died. You blamed me. You launched a committee. That committee destroyed evidence, suppressed witnesses, deleted video footage, coordinated with media, excluded opposing voices. Then you called it a search for truth and used it to impeach me. Trump set down his phone and looked directly at Nancy Pelosi. Not at the audience, not at the camera, at her. And what he said next, delivered with a quietness that was more devastating than any shout, was the sentence that would define his political legacy as much as hers. Everything you have accused me of, corruption, self-dealing, rigging the system, destroying evidence, caring more about power than people, you have actually done, provably, documentedly, with receipts. He paused, smiled. Not a mean smile, not a victory smile, almost a sad one. The smile of someone who takes no pleasure in what they have just done but believes it needed to be done. What is the word for that? When you accuse others of exactly what you are guilty of. I learned it somewhere. Starts with a P. He looked up as if trying to remember. Starts with, oh right, projection. If you are finding this story gripping and you want to see what happened after this moment, hit that subscribe button and the like button so we can keep bringing you stories like this one. The audience reaction was instantaneous, not coordinated, not performative, genuine. The kind of reaction that comes from a room full of people who have just witnessed something they were not prepared for, something that has shifted the ground beneath their assumptions. Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered claps that grew into something more sustained. Even some of the Democrats were nodding. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to be visible, enough to be significant. Because whatever you thought of Donald Trump, whatever your politics, whatever your feelings about his presidency and his rhetoric and his behavior, he had just spent an hour showing documents and timelines and evidence that Nancy Pelosi had gotten very, very rich while her constituents had gotten very, very poor. And she had not been able to explain any of it. Trump leaned forward in his chair. His voice was quieter now, more serious. The performance element was gone, replaced by something that felt, whether it was genuine or not, like sincerity. I built buildings, Nancy. I created jobs. I risked my own money on projects that might fail. I employed tens of thousands of people. I built things you can see and touch, buildings that transformed neighborhoods, that created communities, that gave people places to live and work. I made my money in the private sector before I ever got into politics. I took a dollar salary as president. I donated my entire presidential salary to charity, every quarter to the National Park Service, to the Department of Education, to the Department of Health and Human Services. $400,000 a year, given away. And you, Nancy, you became a nine-figure millionaire on a government salary, while representing one of the poorest congressional districts in America, while your husband made perfectly timed stock trades that beat Warren Buffett, while you lived in a mansion and your constituents lived in tents, while your city fell apart and you got richer, while you lectured billionaires about greed and practiced it yourself. He paused. The room was so still that the hum of the HVAC system was audible. So let me ask you a simple question, Nancy. Between the two of us sitting here tonight, who is actually corrupt? The silence that followed was not silence as most people experience it. It was something denser, something heavier, something that pressed against the walls and ceiling of the Grand Ole Opry House and squeezed the air out of the room. 85 million people watching at home, 500 people in the audience, dozens of cameras capturing every angle. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. The question hung in the air like a bell that had been struck and was still vibrating, the sound fading but the resonance lingering, filling everything. Pelosi looked at Reed, the moderator. Reed looked at his notes. He had nothing. There was no question he could ask that would redirect this, no topic change that would not look like a rescue attempt, no intervention that would not seem like bias. She looked at her staff in the audience. Marcus Delgado was staring at the floor. The others were looking at their phones, at their hands, anywhere but at the stage. She looked around the room, at the audience, at the cameras, at the lights. She looked everywhere except at Trump. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking, not dramatically, not theatrically, just shaking the way a voice shakes when the person speaking has been caught in something they cannot talk their way out of and knows it. This is character assassination, selective use of facts, misleading presentations. I have spent my entire life in public service. I have dedicated myself to. Yes, you have, Trump interrupted, gently, almost softly, and you got very, very rich doing it, while your city fell apart, while your constituents suffered, while your husband made trades that would get anyone else investigated by the SEC. That is not character assassination, Nancy. That is just facts, with receipts. And then, as if the evening had not already delivered enough, Trump held up his phone one last time. One more thing. Since we are talking about corruption and conflicts of interest, and since you mentioned that your husband's success is just smart investing, want to know what I found really interesting during my 6 months of research? A new chart appeared on the screen. This one was perhaps the most damning of all, not because of any single number, but because of the pattern it revealed, the comprehensive, unmistakable, impossible to explain as coincidence pattern. Down the left side, a list of companies. In the middle column, campaign donations those companies had made to Nancy Pelosi's campaigns and associated political action committees over the past decade. On the right column, Paul Pelosi's stock trades in those same companies. These are the top donors to your campaigns and PACs over the past decade, Trump said. Tech companies, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, entertainment conglomerates, the companies that give you money to win elections. And these, he pointed to the right column, are the same companies your husband traded, almost dollar for dollar, almost company for company. The correlation is almost perfect. He let the chart sit there, almost like these companies knew you would help them with legislation, almost like they donated to your campaigns because they knew you would use your position to benefit them, and almost like your husband knew which companies to invest in because you knew which companies were going to benefit from your actions in Congress. It is a three-way relationship. They donate, you legislate, he trades. They get favorable legislation, you get campaign money, he gets stock profits. Everybody wins. Except your constituents, who get tents and needles. He set the phone down. Tell me that is coincidence, Nancy. Please. I would love to hear how that is all just random chance. How your husband just happens to trade the same companies that donate to your campaigns. How those trades just happen to come before legislation that benefits those companies. How all of this just happens over and over and over for 20 years. And Nancy Pelosi, who had spent 40 years perfecting the art of political combat, who had weathered scandals and attacks and controversies that would have ended a dozen lesser careers, who had always come out on top because she was smarter and tougher and better prepared than everyone else in the room, had nothing to say. Absolutely nothing. Because there was nothing to say. The documents spoke for themselves. The timelines were clear. The coincidences were not coincidences when you saw them all together. The wealth accumulation could not be explained by a government salary. The San Francisco decline could not be blamed on forces beyond her control when she had been in control for 37 years. The donor-to-trade-to-legislation pipeline could not be dismissed as random chance when the statistical probability was 0.004%. She sat there, silent, while 85 million people watched, and Donald Trump had won, not with insults, not with bombast, not with conspiracy theories or crowd work or name-calling or any of the things that people associated with him, with receipts, with documents, with charts and timelines and numbers that told a story no amount of rhetoric could undo. The remaining 43 minutes of the town hall were painful to watch. Not dramatic, not explosive, just painful in the way that watching someone try to maintain their dignity after a public humiliation is always painful, regardless of whether you think they deserved it. Pelosi tried to participate. She answered questions from the audience. She talked about policy. She made her usual points about working families and fair shares and the need for comprehensive solutions. But the words sounded hollow now, emptied of their power by the evidence that had been shown, drained of their moral authority by the timelines that were still visible on the screen behind her. Every time she said fighting for the people, the audience was thinking about her $48,000 refrigerators. Every time she said corruption, they were thinking about her husband's stock trades. Every time she said public service, they were thinking about her $240 million net worth. The fight was gone. The superiority was shattered. The grandmother act had evaporated like morning dew on hot pavement. She looked small now, diminished. Not physically, she still sat straight, still held her chin up, still wore the purple suit and the gold brooch. But the aura was gone. The force field of competence and authority that had surrounded her for decades, that had made allies feel safe and opponents feel afraid, that had filled rooms with the sense that Nancy Pelosi was in charge, had dissipated. She looked like what she was, an 83-year-old woman who had just been caught in something she could not talk her way out of. Trump, meanwhile, took questions from the audience, discussed policy, stayed measured and calm. He had made his point. He did not need to pile on. He did not need to gloat or celebrate or rub her face in it. He just let the evidence sit there, displayed on the screen behind them for anyone to see. Every time a question came about the economy, the stock trading timeline was visible behind his head. Every time someone asked about leadership, the before and after San Francisco footage lingered in the audience's memory. Every time someone mentioned trust, the January 6th security documents hovered in the air like a ghost. The closing statements were telling in their contrast. Pelosi went first. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and spoke for 2 minutes. "I stand by my record of service to the American people. I stand by my 4 decades of work fighting for working families, for children, for the vulnerable. I stand by my record against corruption and for accountability. I have made my life about public service and I will continue to do so. I will let the voters judge." It was weak, generic, the kind of closing statement that political consultants write when they have nothing else, the default setting, the safe harbor. Usually it was her strength, the appeal to the public's wisdom, the confidence that her record spoke for itself. But now, after everything that had been shown, it sounded desperate, hollow, like a defendant telling the jury to look at their whole life rather than the specific evidence against them. Trump's closing was simple. He did not stand. He stayed in his chair, leaned forward slightly, and spoke directly to the camera. "Nancy, you are right about one thing. Let the people judge. I showed them the documents. I showed them the stock trades. I showed them the timelines. I showed them the donor-to-trade-to-legislation pipeline. I showed them your mansion and their tents. I showed them $42 million in profits and 37 years of San Francisco getting worse. I showed them the National Guard troops you refused and the evidence your committee destroyed." He shrugged. "Let them decide who has been honest and who has been playing them for fools while getting rich. That is what democracy is. people seeing the truth and making up their own minds. Tonight they saw the truth. The rest is up to them. When Reid called time, Pelosi stood up immediately. She did not shake Trump's hand, did not wave to the audience, did not stop for the cameras. She walked off the set with her staff surrounding her in a tight formation, creating a physical barrier between her and the cameras, between her and the questions that were already being shouted, between her and the reality that was setting in. Trump stayed. He shook hands with Reid. He waved to the audience. He took a few questions from reporters who rushed the stage. He posed for photographs. He signed autographs. He looked relaxed, energized, like someone who had just completed a project they had been working on for months and was satisfied with the result, because he had. The next 2 hours were absolute bedlam. Before Pelosi had even left the building, before her motorcade had pulled away from the Grand Ole Opry House, before her staff had begun drafting the talking points they would try to push to friendly media outlets, the clips were everywhere, every platform, simultaneously, with the force of a digital avalanche that buried everything else in the news cycle, every other story, every other event, every other controversy, all of it irrelevant, all of it pushed aside by the sheer volume and velocity of what was being shared and reshared and commented on, and reacted to across every social media platform on Earth. The stock trading timeline. 94 million views in the first 90 minutes. Pelosi's stammering response when asked about her husband's trades. 76 million views. The split screen of her mansion kitchen versus the homeless encampment, 2.3 miles apart, both in her district. 112 million views. Trump asking between the two of us who is actually corrupt. 88 million views. Pelosi's face when Trump said projection, the involuntary flinch, the widening of the eyes, the moment of recognition that she had been outmaneuvered. 67 million views. The Nvidia trade chart showing 5.2 million in profit 3 weeks before her legislation. 81 million views. Sarah Chen's question about San Francisco and Pelosi's non-answer. 53 million views. The January 6th security documents, the offer of troops and the refusal. 71 million views. Conservative media went supernova. Pelosi destroyed by receipts was the headline on every right-leaning outlet in the country. Trump exposes 40 years of corruption in 90 minutes. The Queen falls. How documents ended Pelosi's career. The death of the Grandmother Act. They played the clips on loop. Every network, every show, every podcast, the stock trading timelines, the January 6th security refusal documents, the San Francisco before and after footage, the donor-to-trade correlation chart, all of it over and over and over, each repetition hammering the narrative deeper into the public consciousness. Liberal media tried to defend her but struggled. MSNBC led with Trump's misleading attacks on Pelosi's wealth. CNN went with questions raised about Pelosi stock trades after contentious town hall. The New York Times ran a measured analysis titled Trading Patterns, raised questions about congressional ethics. But even the outlets most sympathetic to Pelosi, even the journalists who had spent years treating her as a hero of the resistance, could not spin it effectively. Because Trump had not just made accusations. He had shown documents, official documents, government documents, stock purchase records from legally required financial disclosure forms, property records from county assessors' offices, Pentagon memos with official seals, declassified committee communications with red stamps, timeline after timeline that could not be explained away, could not be fact-checked into irrelevance, could not be dismissed as partisan spin. The best they could do was note that the trades were technically legal under current law, while acknowledging they looked bad and raised ethical questions, which was not much of a defense. Technically legal was the equivalent of admitting the substance of the accusation while hiding behind a procedural technicality. It was the kind of defense that made people angrier rather than less angry, because it confirmed what they suspected, that the rules were different for people like Pelosi, that the laws were written to protect the lawmakers, that the system was rigged exactly the way the people who were always called conspiracy theorists said it was rigged. The Washington Post ran a fact check. Trump's claims about Pelosi stock trades, mostly accurate. They tried to add context. They noted that many members of Congress traded stocks. They pointed out that Pelosi was not the only one whose family had made suspiciously well-timed investments. They emphasized that no criminal charges had been filed and that the trades were technically legal. But the numbers were the numbers. The timing was the timing. The correlation between donations and trades and legislation was the correlation. They could not fact-check it away. They could only acknowledge it and try to soften it, which was almost worse than not trying at all. Social media was brutal. Pelosi portfolio trended #1 worldwide within 20 minutes of the town hall's conclusion. Insider Nancy hit #2. Projection Nancy was #4. Pelosi ice cream was #7. Tents and refrigerators was #11. Even liberal accounts that had defended Pelosi for years, that had shared her sarcastic clap as a gif and celebrated her as the toughest woman in Washington, were uncomfortable. The cognitive dissonance between the image they had held, Pelosi the corruption fighter, Pelosi the defender of the people, and the evidence they had just seen, the stock trades, the mansion, the vineyard, the refrigerators, the failing district, was too great to bridge with partisan loyalty. I hate to admit it, one prominent progressive commentator posted, but those stock trades really do look bad. Why has she opposed every bill to ban congressional trading? Another wrote, that refrigerator thing during COVID never sat right with me. Now I understand why. A third posted simply, I cannot defend $42 million in profits from trades right before legislation. I just cannot. And perhaps most damaging of all, a young progressive activist with 3 million followers posted a photograph of the Tenderloin next to Pelosi's mansion with a single line of text. She has been there 37 years. What is the excuse? Sarah Chen, the young woman who had asked the original question about San Francisco, went viral herself. Her question, Pelosi's non-answer, Trump's follow-up with the comparative videos, became its own standalone clip that was shared tens of millions of times. People called her a hero for asking what nobody else would, for cutting through the political platitudes with a simple, honest question about her own city and her own life. She did 3 interviews the next day, all of which she handled with the same straightforward honesty that had made her question so powerful. I did not have an agenda, she told one interviewer. I just wanted to know why my city is falling apart and why the person who has been in charge for 37 years does not seem to have an answer. That is not political. That is just basic accountability. By midnight, every major newspaper had the story on their front page. Pelosi faces scrutiny over stock trades after town hall. Questions mount over Pelosi wealth accumulation. San Francisco's decline under Pelosi in spotlight. Trump documents raise new questions about January 6th security decisions. Pelosi town hall performance raises concerns among Democrats. And Nancy Pelosi, who had gone into the town hall thinking she would look like the wise elder stateswoman, the grandmother of democracy, the adult in the room who would make Trump look small, was trending worldwide for corruption. The next week was a political earthquake measured not in a single dramatic event, but in the steady, relentless accumulation of consequences that followed the town hall like aftershocks following an initial seismic rupture. Ethics complaints were filed. 15 separate complaints to the House Ethics Committee about Pelosi's stock trading patterns, all citing the timelines Trump had shown, all demanding formal investigation, all filed by citizens and organizations with no political affiliation, beyond a desire for accountability. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a watchdog group that leaned liberal, that had spent years going after Republican corruption, filed FOIA requests for all communications between Pelosi's congressional office and the companies in which her husband had traded. They did not say she had done anything illegal. They said, carefully and precisely, that the pattern of trades warranted full transparency and public disclosure, and that the appearance of conflict of interest was significant enough to merit investigation regardless of whether any laws were technically violated. In San Francisco, a grassroots movement emerged overnight, the kind of organic, decentralized political energy that could not be manufactured or controlled. It started with a single poster, wheat pasted on a wall in the Tenderloin at 3 in the morning by someone who was never identified. The poster showed the split screen from the town hall, Pelosi's kitchen on one side, the homeless encampment on the other, with 4 words underneath. She got rich. We got tents. Within 48 hours, that poster was everywhere, printed and reprinted and posted on telephone poles and bus shelters, and boarded up storefronts throughout the Tenderloin and the Mission and the Haight and every other neighborhood that had deteriorated while Pelosi accumulated wealth. It became the rallying cry for a movement to recall city supervisors who had supported Pelosi's policies, to demand accountability from every elected official in the district, to insist that public service and private enrichment were incompatible. Within 10 days, a bill to ban congressional stock trading, the Trust in Congress Act, had 280 co-sponsors in the House. Democrats and Republicans, moderates and progressives, newcomers and veterans. The bill had been introduced 2 years earlier and had languished in committee, blocked by leadership, ignored by the media, dismissed as unpassable. Now suddenly, everyone wanted to vote for it. Every member of Congress who had a re-election campaign to think about, which was all of them, wanted their name attached to it. Pelosi could not oppose it anymore. Not after the town hall. Not after the evidence Trump had shown. Not after the polls that were showing her approval rating in free fall. She issued a statement through her office. I have always supported appropriate reforms to ensure public trust in our democratic institutions. I look forward to working with my colleagues on legislation that addresses legitimate concerns about transparency. It was weak. Everyone knew it. She had been forced into it. The bill passed both chambers within a month, 397 to 38 in the House, 86 to 14 in the Senate. It was not even close. It was the most bipartisan piece of legislation passed in a decade, united not by ideology, but by the collective realization that the public was watching, and the public was angry, and the public had receipts. Pelosi voted yes, but everyone knew it was because she had no choice. Polling told the story with the cold precision of numbers that did not care about feelings or legacies or 40-year careers. Her approval rating in San Francisco, in the deep blue district she had held for 37 years, the district where she had won re-election with 70 and 80% of the vote, dropped from 62% to 34% in 2 weeks. 34%. In San Francisco. For Nancy Pelosi, those were not just bad numbers. Those were extinction-level numbers. 71% of Californians polled said they believed Pelosi had enriched herself using her position. 68% said she does not understand the struggles of ordinary people. 59% said they no longer trusted her to represent their interests. Among voters under 40, her approval was 17%. Among independents, it was 21%. Among her own party's voters, it had dropped below 50 for the first time in her career. By week 3, the Wall Street Journal published a comprehensive investigation that would become the definitive forensic analysis of what it called the Pelosi portfolio. They had hired a team of data scientists and forensic accountants to analyze Paul Pelosi's trades over a 20-year period, matching them against legislative actions, government announcements, committee meetings, classified briefings, and any other event that Nancy Pelosi had participated in or had advanced knowledge of. Their findings were devastating. They found 142 major trades over 20 years. 89 of them, 62%, were made within 30 days of legislation or government action that directly affected those stocks. And Nancy Pelosi had either voted on, influenced, sponsored, co-sponsored, or had advanced knowledge of all 89. The statistical analysis was damning. The probability of this pattern occurring by random chance was 0.004%. Essentially impossible. Either Paul Pelosi was the single luckiest investor in the history of financial markets, a man whose intuition defied mathematical probability, a man whose timing was so perfect that it exceeded what could be achieved by chance over millions of iterations, or he had information that other investors did not have, information that came from his wife's position. The Journal did not accuse anyone of crimes. They did not need to. They just laid out the numbers, the trades, the timelines, the correlations, the probabilities, and let readers draw their own conclusions. The conclusions were not favorable. By month 2, investigative journalists from multiple outlets had dug into the Napa vineyard purchase with the thoroughness of people who smelled a story and would not stop until they had every piece of it. The seller, Richard Benson, had been under investigation by the California Attorney General's office for fraud at the time of the sale, a fact that had not been publicly known until the town hall prompted reporters to start pulling threads. The investigation had been opened in 2007 concerning allegations that Benson had defrauded investors in a San Francisco real estate development. Then, in early 2009, approximately 6 months after Pelosi purchased the vineyard from Benson, the investigation was mysteriously dropped, closed, no charges, no explanation. The closing happened shortly after Pelosi had voted for zoning changes that benefited Benson's San Francisco development projects. The California Attorney General, responding to public pressure and media inquiries, announced that they were reopening the investigation. Not because of the town hall specifically, the AG's office was careful to say, but because new information had come to light that warranted a fresh review. Everyone understood what that meant. Local San Francisco media, emboldened by the national attention, discovered additional details about the vineyard that added to the picture. Pelosi had been classifying the property as agricultural land for tax purposes, despite the fact that the vineyard's production was minimal, and it was used primarily as a personal residence and entertainment property. This classification reduced her property tax bill by approximately $180,000 per year, while lecturing billionaires about paying their fair share, while championing legislation that raised taxes on working Americans, while positioning herself as the champion of economic justice and the opponent of tax avoidance by the wealthy. The optics were catastrophic. HBO announced a documentary, The Pelosi Portfolio: How Congress Gets Rich. It would be directed by a Peabody Award-winning filmmaker who had previously made documentaries about Wall Street corruption and pharmaceutical industry malfeasance. It would premiere in 3 months. Pelosi's legal team sent a letter threatening legal action if the documentary contained defamatory content. HBO's response was a single sentence released to the press. Everything in this documentary is based on public records, official government documents, and expert analysis. We stand by our journalism. The documentary would go on to win an Emmy. It would be viewed over 40 million times on HBO's streaming platform. It would become required viewing in business ethics courses at Harvard and Wharton and Stanford. And it would contain not a single piece of information that was not already public. That was the most devastating thing about it. Everything was already there, in disclosure forms, in property records, in the congressional record, in publicly available data. It had always been there. It had just never been organized, compiled, and presented in a way that made the pattern visible. Trump had done it first on that stage in Nashville. The journalists did it more thoroughly afterward, but the information had always existed. It had just been hiding in plain sight, protected by the assumption that someone who talked about fighting corruption could not possibly be practicing it. 3 months after the town hall, Nancy Pelosi held a press conference in San Francisco. She held it in the federal building, in a room that she had used for press conferences dozens of times before, a room that usually felt like her territory, her home turf, a place where she was in control and the reporters were her guests. It did not feel that way today. She looked tired. Not just physically tired, though she was that too, the past months having aged her visibly, the lines on her face deeper, the energy that had always animated her diminished. She looked tired in a deeper way. The tiredness of someone who has been fighting a battle they know they cannot win and has finally accepted it. She was dressed simply. A dark blue suit. No bright colors. No gold brooch. She stood behind a podium and read from prepared remarks, her voice steady but flat, drained of the musicality and rhythm that had always made her speeches compelling. After much reflection and consultation with my family, she said, I have decided not to seek any leadership positions in the next Congress. I will continue to serve my constituents in California's 11th District, but I believe it is time for new leadership in our party. New voices, new energy, new ideas. I am proud of everything we have accomplished together, and I will continue to support our party and our values in whatever capacity is most helpful." The reporters in the room knew what this meant. She was done, finished. No more speaker, no more minority leader, no more committee chairs, no more power positions, just a backbencher serving out her term, stripped of the influence that had made her one of the most powerful people in Washington for 2 decades. The questions started immediately. Is this because of the stock trading scrutiny? Are you concerned about ethics investigations? Do you regret opposing legislation to ban congressional trading? Will you cooperate with the Wall Street Journal's ongoing investigation? Have you spoken with the California Attorney General about the vineyard purchase? Do you have any comment on the HBO documentary? She did not answer any of them. She said she was looking forward to spending more time with her family, to continuing to serve the people of San Francisco, to supporting the next generation of Democratic leaders. She thanked the press for their time. She walked off the stage. She did not take questions. Her staff formed a corridor around her, shepherding her through the hallways and out to her waiting car, blocking cameras and shouted questions with their bodies, their faces set in the grim determination of people performing the last duties of a job they knew was ending. 2 weeks later, a Democratic primary challenger announced. Her name was Katie Morrison. She was 38 years old, an attorney who had grown up in the Tenderloin, gone to public school in the district, worked her way through UC Berkeley Law School on scholarships and student loans, and spent the past decade doing pro bono legal work for homeless advocacy organizations in San Francisco. She had actually lived in the district her entire life. She had seen it deteriorate. She had watched it happen. She knew the names of the people living in the encampments because she had represented them, had fought for them, had tried to get them housing and medical care and drug treatment while their congresswoman lived in a mansion in Pacific Heights. Her announcement video was devastating in its simplicity. She stood on a street corner in the Tenderloin. Behind her, visible in the frame, was a homeless encampment, tents and tarps and shopping carts. She did not try to hide it or soften it or pretend it was not there. She looked directly into the camera and spoke. Nancy Pelosi has represented this district for 37 years. In that time, homelessness has exploded. Drug addiction has destroyed entire neighborhoods. Small businesses have closed by the hundreds. Working families have been priced out of the city they love. Our streets are covered in needles and despair. And Nancy Pelosi became worth $200 million. She paused. I am running because San Francisco deserves representation that serves the people, not themselves. Someone who lives in this district, who sees the problems every day, who walks these streets every day, who will not get rich while their neighbors suffer. I do not own a mansion. I do not own a vineyard. I do not have $48,000 refrigerators. I have a one-bedroom apartment in the Mission, and I have dedicated my career to helping the people of this city. That is what representation should look like. She raised $4.7 million in the first 3 weeks, all small-dollar donations. The average contribution was $42, a number that was either a coincidence or a deliberate reference to Pelosi's $42 million in stock trading profits. The money poured in from everywhere, from progressives who felt betrayed by a leader they had trusted, from moderates who wanted change, from young people who had never donated to a political campaign before but who had seen the town hall clips and felt, for the first time, that their vote could actually change something, from Republicans who wanted to see Pelosi gone and were willing to donate to a Democrat to make it happen. Early polling showed Morrison leading Pelosi by 19 points in a district Pelosi had held for 37 years. 19 points. In what had been considered the safest Democratic seat in the country. A seat that Pelosi had won with 77% of the vote in her most recent re-election. A seat that was supposed to be hers for life. By month 6, it was over. Pelosi announced that she would not seek re-election to focus on family and other priorities. The statement was released on a Friday afternoon, the traditional time for news you want to bury, the time when politicians dump stories they hope will be forgotten by Monday. It was short. It was written by lawyers rather than speechwriters. It did not mention the town hall. It did not mention the stock trading. It did not mention the ethics complaints or the investigations or the documentary or the primary challenge. It just said she was grateful for 40 years of service and was looking forward to the next chapter. Translation: clear to everyone who could read between the lines of political language. She knew she would lose. She knew the primary was unwinnable. She knew that the polls, the money, the energy, the momentum, everything was flowing toward Morrison and away from her, and that nothing she could do, no speech she could give, no ad she could run, no door she could knock on, would change the fundamental reality that the people of San Francisco had seen the receipts and could not unsee them. Better to retire with some dignity, to frame it as a choice, to maintain the illusion of control, than to lose to a primary challenger half her age in a district she had held for 4 decades. Katie Morrison won the Democratic primary unopposed. She went on to win the general election by 23 points. Nancy Pelosi's career ended not with some dramatic scandal or criminal indictment or impeachment, not with the kind of explosive, cinematic finale that Hollywood would write, just a quiet retirement announcement and a devastating primary challenge that never actually happened because she quit first. The town hall with Trump had destroyed her. Not immediately, not in a single blow, but completely, systematically, methodically, with documents and timelines and evidence that could not be explained away or spun into insignificance or ignored by anyone who cared about the truth. She had gone in thinking she was the wise elder, the adult in the room, the defender of democracy against the corrupt billionaire. She had left exposed as everything she had spent 40 years accusing him of being, and she never recovered. 1 year after the town hall, Donald Trump gave an interview at Mar-a-Lago. He was sitting on the terrace overlooking the Atlantic, the sunset turning the sky the color of old gold, the waves providing a constant background murmur. The journalist, a veteran political reporter who had covered every president since Clinton, asked about that night in Nashville. "Did you plan to destroy her career?" Trump smiled, that same amused smile from the town hall, the one that meant he was enjoying the question or at least the memory it evoked. "I did not destroy anything. I just showed people the receipts. She destroyed her own career by being corrupt for 40 years and thinking nobody would ever notice. Nobody would ever put it all together. Nobody would ever show the pattern. I just showed the pattern." "How long did you prepare?" 6 months. Had a whole team going through public records, stock trades, property purchases, legislative votes, committee assignments, donor lists, matching everything up, cross-referencing dates, calculating profits, building timelines. It was meticulous work, detailed work, the kind of work that good investigators do and that journalists used to do before they decided their job was to protect people like Nancy instead of investigate them. The stock trading evidence, that was all real. Every single trade, every date, every profit, all public record. Paul Pelosi files disclosure forms. Anyone can look them up. They are on the internet. We just organized it. Showed the pattern. Let people see what was obvious once you laid it all out. The individual trades, they do not look that suspicious. One trade here, one trade there could be coincidence. But when you put them all together, when you see trade after trade after trade perfectly timed to legislation and government actions, when you see the success rate beating Warren Buffett, when you see the correlation with campaign donors, the pattern is undeniable. We did not create the pattern. She did. We just showed it. The January 6th documents. Declassified them all. Took months. Some agencies fought it. Some people did not want those documents public, but I am the president, I have the authority. And I believe the American people had a right to know that the woman who spent years blaming me for the Capitol breach had refused my offer of 10,000 troops. That is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of documented fact. The offer was made. It was refused. 3 days later, the Capitol was breached. That is what happened. The documents prove it. Did you feel bad? She is an elderly woman. Trump actually laughed. Elderly woman. She spent 40 years calling me a fascist, a criminal, a threat to democracy, a Russian agent. She impeached me twice. She ran a committee that destroyed evidence and suppressed witnesses to make me look bad. She tore up my speech on live television. She gave me that sarcastic clap. She made it personal for years. And the whole time she was making $42 million on insider trades and living in a mansion while her district fell apart. No, I did not feel bad. I felt like I was doing America a favor. Someone needed to show people the truth. I had the platform and the evidence, so I did it. What should people learn from that night? Trump leaned forward, and for a moment, just a moment, the performance faded and something else appeared. Something that might have been genuine belief. That when someone spends decades accusing others of corruption while getting mysteriously rich, check their bank account. When someone lectures billionaires about greed while their husband is making stock trades better than Warren Buffett, check the trades. When someone claims to fight for the people while their district falls apart, drive through the district. Nancy Pelosi made $200 million on a government salary. Her husband's stock picks beat the greatest investor who ever lived. Her district became a disaster while she lived in a mansion. And for 40 years, nobody asked hard questions because she said the right things about fighting corruption. She had the right image, the right words, the right expressions, and everyone just assumed it was real because it looked real. Well, someone finally asked, and she had no answers. That is all that happened, questions with receipts. He looked directly at the camera, and when he spoke, his voice had the particular weight of someone delivering a line they have thought about for a long time, a line they believe summarizes not just a single event but a broader truth about the way the world works. The receipts matter. Always check for receipts. Do not just listen to what people say. Look at what they do. Look at their bank accounts. Look at their stock trades. Look at their districts. Look at their lives, because the words are easy. Anyone can say the right things, but the receipts tell the truth. The town hall became a cultural moment, not just political, cultural. It entered the lexicon, the shared vocabulary of American life, the collection of events and images and phrases that everyone understood regardless of their politics. The Pelosi moment became shorthand for any situation in which someone's public image was destroyed by their private reality. The receipts became shorthand for documented evidence that contradicted an established narrative. Projection Nancy became shorthand for hypocrisy, so profound that it was almost comical. Business schools taught it. The Pelosi portfolio became a standard case study in courses on ethics in public service and corporate governance. How public officials could accumulate wealth that created the appearance of corruption even when technically legal. How the gap between law and ethics could swallow entire careers. How perception and reality diverged, and what happened when they collided. Law schools taught it. Insider trading and government knowledge became a module in securities regulation courses. Where was the line between legal trading and illegal use of material non-public information? How should the law treat the spouses and family members of lawmakers? What reforms were needed to address the fundamental conflict of interest inherent in allowing people who wrote laws to profit from those laws? Journalism schools taught it. How to research public officials' wealth became a required exercise in investigative reporting courses. Students learned to match financial disclosures with legislative actions, to build timelines, to calculate correlations, to identify patterns that individual data points concealed. They learned that the information had always been there, in public records and disclosure forms and the congressional record, and that the failure was not one of access but of effort. Nobody had done the work. Trump's team had done the work. And that fact, the fact that a political opponent had done the investigative reporting that journalists should have been doing for decades, was a professional embarrassment that haunted the industry. Political science courses taught it. When brand meets reality. The Pelosi case study became a standard lecture in courses on political communication and public image management. How political figures who built entire brands on fighting corruption could be destroyed when their own conduct contradicted that brand. How authenticity, or the lack of it, was the ultimate vulnerability. How the most dangerous opponent was not the one who attacked you with insults, but the one who attacked you with your own record. The clips were watched hundreds of millions of times. Students around the world analyzed Trump's debate tactics, the way he let Pelosi attack first, building her own scaffold, the way he used documents instead of rhetoric, evidence instead of emotion, the way he stayed calm instead of combative, reasonable instead of bombastic, the way he deployed facts in a specific sequence designed to build toward an inescapable conclusion, the way he used contrast, her words versus his evidence, her mansion versus their tents, her wealth versus her salary, to create visual and narrative juxtapositions that were more powerful than any argument could be. They studied it not because they admired Trump necessarily, but because it worked. It was effective. It was a masterclass in the use of evidence in public discourse, in the destruction of a political brand through documented reality. And Pelosi became a cautionary tale, not just about corruption, though the evidence strongly suggested corruption, about hypocrisy, about the gap between what you say and what you do, about spending 40 years positioning yourself as morally superior while doing exactly what you accused others of doing, about the danger of believing your own narrative so completely that you forgot others could check it against reality, about the inevitability, in an age of public records and data analysis and social media, of being caught. Her Wikipedia page was updated within hours of the town hall and continued to be revised in the weeks and months that followed. The stock trading controversy got its own section, lengthy and detailed, citing the Wall Street Journal investigation, the House Ethics Committee complaints, the congressional legislation that followed. The San Francisco homelessness crisis got another section, with statistics and comparisons to other cities. The January 6 security decision got a third, with references to the declassified documents. The town hall itself got a fourth. Her legacy, which she had spent decades crafting, which had been carefully constructed from speeches and legislative achievements and moments of political courage, was fundamentally and irreversibly changed. From powerful speaker who fought Trump to politician who enriched herself while her district deteriorated. From champion of the people to cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power. She had tried to write her own history, tried to position herself as the resistance hero, the grandmother who stood up to the tyrant, the wise woman who held the line against authoritarianism and corruption and all the forces that threatened American democracy. She had written a book about it, given speeches about it, done interviews about it, built an entire post-career identity around it. Instead, she would be remembered for the ice cream refrigerators, the stock trades, the mansion versus the tents, the 42 million in profits, the wealth accumulation that could never quite be explained by smart investing or a successful husband, the National Guard troops she refused, the evidence her committee destroyed. And for the moment when Donald Trump showed 85 million people the receipts and she had no answer because there was no answer. The numbers were the numbers, the timelines were the timelines, the trades were the trades, the profits were the profits. The correlation between donors and trades and legislation was the correlation. The contrast between her wealth and her constituents' poverty was undeniable. She had spent 40 years playing the game, getting rich, using her position, accumulating power and wealth simultaneously, each feeding the other, each protecting the other, until they were so intertwined that you could not separate the public servant from the private profiteer, all while claiming to fight against people doing exactly that. And she got away with it. For 40 years, she got away with it, because she said the right things, because she had the right image, because the media that should have investigated her protected her instead, because her opponents attacked her with insults rather than evidence, because nobody took the time to compile the records, match the dates, calculate the profits, and show the pattern, until the night she sat across from someone who had done exactly that, who had spent 6 months compiling the evidence, who had the platform to show it, who had the screen to display it, who had the audience to witness it, and who had the discipline to present it calmly, methodically, with documents rather than rhetoric, with timelines rather than accusations, with numbers rather than insults. Nancy Pelosi's career ended not with investigations or indictments or dramatic revelations. It ended with receipts, stock trades, property records, timelines, profit calculations, declassified government documents, the most boring kind of documents in the world, and the most devastating, because they told the truth about a woman who had spent 40 years pretending to fight corruption while practicing it, about a public servant who had served herself, about a champion of the people who had championed her own bank account, about a grandmother who had preached sacrifice while living in luxury, about a politician who had built her brand on integrity while building her fortune on insider knowledge. The Queen fell, not to a scandal, not to an opponent, not to a conspiracy or a coup or a dramatic confrontation. to her own documented record of enriching herself while claiming to serve the people, to receipts, to the boring, unglamorous, undeniable truth of numbers on a page. And 85 million people watched it happen in real time, with receipts. Because the receipts always matter, they always tell the truth. Even when the person they are about has spent 40 years telling everyone a different story. The receipts do not care about your image. The receipts do not care about your speeches. The receipts do not care about your sarcastic claps or your grandmother smiles or your 4 decades of political dominance. The receipts are just numbers and dates and dollar amounts. And when someone finally puts them all together and shows them to the world, no amount of political skill, no amount of rhetorical ability, no amount of moral posturing can make them say something different than what they say. Nancy Pelosi learned that on a stage in Nashville, Tennessee, in front of 85 million people. She learned it 47 minutes into what was supposed to be her coronation. She learned it when Donald Trump pulled out his phone and showed a chart and asked a simple question. And she had no answer, because there was no answer. There was only the truth. And the truth was on the screen behind her, in numbers she could not dispute, in timelines she could not explain, in profits she could not justify, in a pattern she could not deny. The truth was in the receipts, and the receipts were devastating.